The most powerful message Queen Elizabeth II ever delivered was never broadcast from the sweeping stone balcony of Buckingham Palace. It was never recorded by the BBC for a Christmas Day address, nor was it ever codified into a public decree debated by the Houses of Parliament. It was quiet, it was fiercely private, it was sealed in a fortified vault, and yet it reveals infinitely more about the ultimate survival and future architecture of the British royal family than any grand speech she gave during her entire 70-year reign. When the Queen passed away at Balmoral Castle in September of 2022, the entire globe focused its collective gaze on the ancient, mesmerizing pageantry of mourning. The world watched the synchronized gun salutes echoing across Green Park, the miles-long queue of weeping citizens winding along the River Thames, and the solemn, rhythmic procession of the military through the historic streets of London. But while thousands of cameras were fixed on the public ritual of goodbye, a completely different, infinitely more intimate transfer of power was unfolding behind the impenetrable velvet curtains of the palace. This was the reading of a private will. It was a personal decision, a final, unanswerable choice made by a sovereign who no longer had to satisfy the press, appease the politicians, or manage the fragile egos of her immediate family. And in that ultimate moment of absolute autonomy, she bypassed the obvious choices. She did not leave her most cherished personal sanctuary to the future king. She did not leave it to her new queen consort. She did not leave it to the loud, the ambitious, or the heavily publicized working royals. She selected a young woman who has spent her entire life actively avoiding the headlines, Lady Louise Windsor. At first glance, the inheritance sounds deceptively simple, almost quaint. It is a stone cottage nestled deep within the sprawling 50,000-acre Balmoral estate, a peaceful residence tucked away in the biting wind of the Scottish Highlands, surrounded by ancient pine forests, heather-covered moorland, and endless heavy skies. But in the highly codified world of the British aristocracy, real estate is never just real estate. Balmoral is not merely another royal property on a long list of castles. It is not owned by the Crown Estate. It does not belong to the British state or the taxpayer. It has been privately held, bought and paid for by the monarch's own personal funds since Queen Victoria and Prince Albert fell in love with the landscape and purchased it in 1852. That single, vital legal distinction changes everything about this narrative. Balmoral was Elizabeth's ultimate sanctuary. It was the one place on the planet where she went to simply breathe. It was where she rode her fell ponies through the morning mist, where she walked her corgis without the suffocating presence of protocol, and where she could exist not as the anointed sovereign of the United Kingdom, but simply as a wife, a mother, and a grandmother. It was the only place where the rigid, unyielding machinery of the monarchy softened into the warmth of an actual family. And, crucially, it is the exact place where she chose to close her eyes and take her final breath. To leave a piece of Balmoral to someone is not a casual gesture of grandmotherly affection. It is not a symbolic ribbon-cutting ceremony. It is an invitation into the inner sanctum. You do not divide your ultimate refuge, your sacred ground, unless you are absolutely, undeniably certain about who truly belongs inside it. That is why this story is currently sending shockwaves through the highest echelons of British society. This was not an official redistribution of royal titles. It was not a constitutional maneuver designed to please the public. It was a private act, and in a family that communicates entirely through optics and proximity, private acts speak with a deafening roar. Lady Louise Windsor, the youngest granddaughter of the late Queen, has never chased the spotlight. Born prematurely in November of 2003, her entrance into the world was not a grand, televised spectacle, but a terrifying medical emergency. Weighing just 4 pounds, she was delivered via an emergency surgical procedure while her mother, Sophie, hovered near the edge of survival. Because of this fragile beginning, Louise grew up carefully shielded from the predatory lenses of the tabloid press, raised under the incredibly steady, grounded guidance of Prince Edward and Sophie, who built their family life deliberately and intentionally, outside the toxic noise that so often consumes the senior line of succession. When Louise turned 18, she crossed a threshold that would have tempted almost anyone else in the world. Under the letters patent issued by King George V, as the grandchild of the monarch through the male line, she had the absolute legal right to be styled as Her Royal Highness Princess Louise. She could have claimed the title. She could have leveraged the immense social and financial status that comes with it. She could have walked onto the global stage draped in the armor of absolute royalty. Instead, she made a choice that stunned royal watchers but perfectly encapsulated her character. She chose to remain Lady Louise. She chose discretion over elevation. She chose a lower profile in an institution that has a habit of magnifying human ego into dangerous proportions. That choice did not go unnoticed by the monarch who sat at the head of the table. In a family that has in recent years endured explosive tell-all television interviews, venomous ghost-written memoirs, public grievances aired for million-dollar payouts, and televised fractures that threaten the very foundation of the institution, silence has become the ultimate luxury. Loyalty carries weight. Restraint carries immense, immeasurable weight. And Queen Elizabeth II understood the weight of human character better than any diplomat or politician alive. In her twilight years, she watched with a heavy heart as the monarchy strained under the pressure of modern celebrity culture. She saw relationships fracture beyond repair. She saw trust exploited for streaming deals. She saw how quickly the public narrative could shift from adoration to outrage. Through all of this chaos, through the scandals of her second son and the spectacular, acrimonious exit of her grandson across the Atlantic, Lady Louise remained an unwavering constant. There were no leaked complaints to friendly journalists. There was no commentary on social media. There were no commercial ventures trading on her proximity to the throne. There was just her university studies, her devotion to her family, and a quiet, beautiful dedication to the specific, rugged traditions that her grandparents loved most. Perhaps the most revealing dimension of Louise's character, and the moment that undoubtedly cemented her place in the Queen's final wishes, emerged through her deeply personal relationship with Prince Philip. The Duke of Edinburgh was a man famously devoid of sentimentality. He was direct, often abrasive, and deeply committed to stoicism and discipline. He had absolutely zero patience for performance without substance. In his later years, when his body could no longer handle the rigors of polo, he devoted his time to carriage driving. This is a gritty, dangerous, and physically demanding sport that requires absolute concentration, iron control, and a calm, unshakable demeanor under pressure. He took it upon himself to personally teach Lady Louise. Those hours spent across the open, unforgiving ground at Balmoral and Windsor were not ceremonial photo opportunities. They were practical, grueling lessons in controlling powerful animals, reading the terrain, and mastering one's own fear. It was not glamorous work, and it required a patience that few teenagers possess. When Prince Philip passed away in the spring of 2021, the world watched a carefully orchestrated, socially distanced funeral dictated by the harsh restrictions of a global pandemic. Family members were spaced far apart in the wooden pews of George's chapel, the ceremony stripped back to its bare, agonizing bones. Yet, one image cut through the bleak formality of the day and etched itself into the national memory. It was the sight of 17-year-old Lady Louise, dressed in black, stepping up to drive her grandfather's beloved carriage as part of the tribute procession. She did not give a tearful interview about her grief. She did not seek attention from the cameras. She honored the man she loved in the exact language he had taught her, through action, discipline, and silent duty. She held the reins because it mattered to him, and because she simply could not bear to see his place sit empty. That image lingered long after the funeral broadcasts ended. Queen Elizabeth, sitting alone in her mourning, saw that tribute, and she understood exactly what it meant. A monarch's last will and testament is legally sealed for 90 years by order of the High Court in the United Kingdom. This is an ancient protocol designed to protect the institutional dignity of the sovereign and to prevent the public dissection of private family wealth. We will not read the specific pages, We will not analyze the specific legal jargon or see the ink of her signature. But throughout her unprecedented reign, Elizabeth rarely communicated her deepest feelings through words anyway. She communicated through action. She spoke through invitation, through physical proximity, and by choosing who was allowed to stand beside her when the camera stopped rolling. And in the very end, by leaving a physical piece of her most cherished Scottish landscape to Louise, she rendered her final judgment on what truly matters in the House of Windsor. Then comes the entirely unexpected layer to this narrative, a layer that shifts this story from a touching tale of grandmotherly love into a masterclass of modern royal strategy. After Elizabeth's passing, the ownership of the sprawling Balmoral estate transferred automatically and legally into the hands of King Charles. Control shifted immediately. The ultimate authority over the land, the castles, and the cottages consolidated under the new sovereign. Yet, highly placed sources within the palace infrastructure suggest that it was Prince William, the new Prince of Wales, who took an active, almost aggressive interest in ensuring that Lady Louise's inheritance moved forward without a single moment of friction. That detail matters immensely because William is not merely a supportive older cousin ensuring a fair reading of a will. He is the immediate heir to the throne. He is the future king. Every single action he takes now, every alliance he fosters, and every boundary he enforces reflects the exact structural framework he intends to build when he inevitably wears the crown. When he uses his considerable influence to protect someone quiet, someone unflinchingly loyal, someone who is perfectly aligned with the stoic traditions of the past, he is not just honoring his grandmother's dying wish, he is aggressively shaping his own future. He is drawing a brilliant, invisible circle of trust around the throne, and it is becoming increasingly obvious that not everyone is being invited inside that perimeter. This is exactly why a drafty stone cottage in the Scottish Highlands is not simply a cottage. It is a flare sent up in the night sky. It is a permanent, physical placement of a trusted ally. It is a message broadcast to the rest of the family about who embodies the values that Elizabeth guarded so fiercely for 7 decades, and who William intends to elevate moving forward. The will itself may be locked away in a safe for nearly a century, but the ultimate choice was visible the very moment it was executed. And in the complex, layered world of the monarchy, silence paired with action says absolutely everything. To fully grasp the political and emotional weight of this inheritance, you have to look beyond the postcard image of Balmoral Castle. You have to understand it not as a tourist destination, but as the emotional fortress of the monarch. Balmoral Castle sits in Aberdeenshire, surrounded by roughly 50,000 acres of raw, spectacular, and unforgiving Scottish landscape. It is beautiful, but more importantly, it is completely isolated. In the heavily scheduled, meticulously surveilled life of a British monarch, true privacy is a commodity far rarer and much more valuable than the crown jewels. Because it was purchased with private funds by Victoria and Albert, Balmoral remains entirely insulated from the bureaucratic machinery of the British government. It is not managed by civil servants. It is not tied to the moods of Parliament. It is entirely, legally, family property. For Queen Elizabeth, stepping onto the grounds of Balmoral was the equivalent of exhaling after holding her breath for 11 months of the year. Every summer, the entire royal apparatus relocated there, and the rigid, suffocating armor of monarchy was briefly unbuckled. Official schedules softened, public engagements dwindled to a trickle. Formal dress codes were completely abandoned in favor of thick wool sweaters, waterproof jackets, and mud-caked boots. It was the closest the Queen ever came to experiencing a normal existence. That is precisely why the location of her death felt so deeply poetic to those who knew her. She did not pass away surrounded by the pomp and circumstance of the capital city. She passed away in the one place where she felt she truly belonged to herself. Now, consider the profound psychological weight of that space. If you had one place on Earth that allowed you to strip away the heaviest responsibilities imaginable and simply exist as a human being, who would you trust with the keys to its gates? Would you hand a piece of it to a political ally? To a relative who only visits when the cameras are present? Or would you leave it to someone who fundamentally understood and embodied the quiet, unpretentious values that the landscape represented? Balmoral was never about showcasing the hierarchy of the monarchy. It was the ultimate testing ground for human belonging. Over the years, seasoned royal observers noted subtle but distinct patterns. They tracked who was invited for the longest stays, who was asked to join the Queen for her private picnics in the hills, and who appeared in the relaxed, off-duty photographs walking beside her along the estate's quiet, roaring rivers. Balmoral was the stage where true relationships were revealed without the need for press releases. Prince Edward and Sophie were consistently present in the Queen's later, loneliest years. Following the death of Prince Philip, their visits became even more frequent, providing a steady, uncontroversial, and highly protective presence around the aging monarch. Their children, including Lady Louise, grew up treating Balmoral not as a daunting royal palace, but as a familiar, cherished family home. Louise did not arrive there feeling the crushing weight of public expectation. She arrived as a granddaughter ready to ride horses in the rain. That distinction matters deeply in a family where nearly every interaction is fraught with secondary motives. Inside the gates of the Scottish estate, the monarchy sheds its protective layers. Titles soften into first names. Stiff protocol relaxes into easy conversation over the dinner table. What remains, when all the gold braid and ceremony is stripped away, is raw character. Elizabeth valued discretion above almost all other traits. She valued consistency. She deeply valued those who did not weaponize their proximity to the throne for personal leverage or financial gain. Balmoral was the ultimate filter for these qualities. The estate carries the heavy, beautiful weight of memory. Therefore, to be granted a cottage inside its vast, private grounds is not simply a real estate transaction. It is an official induction into a private circle of institutional memory. There are multiple smaller residences scattered across the Balmoral grounds, each existing within a comfortable distance of the main castle, but secluded enough to offer total personal space. To grant one of these specific properties in a private will is to declare, from beyond the grave, that this person is part of the unbreakable core. It is easy for the public to underestimate this gesture because it completely lacks the spectacle of a royal wedding or a coronation. There was no televised announcement, no cheering crowds, no formal investiture. But the most powerful decisions made within the royal family are almost always the quietest ones. This brings us to the profound tension that is currently simmering just beneath the surface of the new Carolian era. When Queen Elizabeth's estate passed to King Charles, the legal ownership of the vast Scottish property shifted. Yet, the emotional architecture of the place remained inextricably tied to his mother's memory. Any continuation of her private wishes, especially regarding property, required the absolute alignment of the senior family members. This is where the inheritance becomes a deeply structural issue. Because Balmoral represents the continuity of the bloodline, the British monarchy survives not solely through constitutional order, but through the perception of a carefully maintained internal cohesion. Who is permitted to gather at Balmoral signals to the world who is trusted. And who is trusted dictates who will influence the future tone and direction of the institution. In recent years, the monarchy has faced unprecedented, highly publicized fractures. They have navigated interviews that dragged private, painful conversations into the global digital arena. They have survived memoirs that detailed internal family tensions with ruthless, profitable precision. They have weathered legal disputes that expose the vulnerability of the institution to the modern media landscape. Against that chaotic backdrop, Balmoral has remained a constant, an ancient rock untouched by the swirling tides of commercial narrative. To deliberately position Lady Louise within that specific landscape is to position her within the absolute center of stability. And stability is the most valuable currency a constitutional monarchy possesses when navigating the relentless scrutiny of the modern age. But if William's aggressive protection of Louise's inheritance hints at the monarchy's disciplined future, then the noticeable marginalization of Queen Camilla in these private estate matters reveals the intense, lingering complexity of its present. To fully understand why the inheritance of a small Scottish cottage carries such heavy emotional and political undertones, one must examine not only who was chosen by the late Queen, but who was pointedly overlooked. Camilla, as queen consort, currently stands beside King Charles in every formal, constitutional capacity. She wears the crown, she attends state visits, and she represents the nation at official engagements. She occupies a legally recognized and historically vital role. Yet, the monarchy has always operated on two parallel, occasionally conflicting tracks: the formal, constitutional structure and the invisible, emotional structure. Formally, Camilla's position is secure. Emotionally, her standing within the deep ancestral roots of the family has always been infinitely more layered and fraught with historical baggage. Her relationship with Charles, beginning in the early 1970s and preceding his ill-fated marriage to Diana Spencer, became the most intensely scrutinized and damaging narrative in modern royal life. The spectacular, highly public breakdown of Charles and Diana's marriage nearly brought the monarchy to its knees. Diana's infamous television interview, in which she remarked with devastating clarity that there were 3 people in her marriage, reshaped global public perception overnight. The damage inflicted on the institution and on Charles's personal reputation was profound and took decades of meticulous public relations work to repair. Camilla's presence in that narrative made her, for a long time, the most vilified woman in Britain. When Charles and Camilla finally married in the spring of 2005, the ceremony was a quiet, civil affair, distinctly lacking the grand religious pageantry usually afforded to a future king. Notably, Queen Elizabeth did not attend the civil marriage ceremony itself, citing her role as the Supreme Governor of the Church of England, though she did host a reception afterward. The official explanations were steeped in constitutional and theological logic, but the optics lingered in the public consciousness. The sovereign was present for the polite celebration, but entirely absent for the exchange of vows. In the theater of monarchy, optics are reality. For years, the public discourse engaged in endless, heated speculation about what title Camilla would eventually hold. Early communications from Clarence House suggested she would be known merely as Princess Consort when Charles ascended the throne, a unique designation specifically designed to soften public resistance and respect the enduring memory of Diana. The title of Queen Consort carried massive historical weight and emotional baggage that many feared the British public would never accept. It required a level of forgiveness and acceptance not only from the populace, but crucially, from within the deepest, most private corners of the family itself. It was not until February of 2022, during the twilight of her reign, that Queen Elizabeth issued a carefully worded statement expressing her sincere wish that Camilla be known as Queen Consort. The announcement was measured, it was highly dignified, but it was also fundamentally strategic. The phrasing did not erupt with overwhelming personal affection. It was a deliberate, considered, almost legalistic directive. This distinction between constitutional duty and personal affection is subtle, but within palace walls, it is everything. Elizabeth was a master pragmatist who consistently separated her personal sentiments from institutional necessity. She understood the political realism required to keep the firm running smoothly. Supporting Camilla's title was a necessary maneuver to stabilize Charles's impending reign. It instantly reduced ambiguity. It prevented a prolonged, damaging media debate during the delicate period of succession. It was a move designed to protect the crown. But a monarch's private will and testament operates in a completely different universe. A private will is not negotiated with the prime minister. It is not shaped by the advice of public relations experts. It is the ultimate reflection of personal disposition, the final, unedited statement of the soul. If Elizabeth chose to leave a cherished piece of her most beloved sanctuary to Lady Louise, rather than reorganizing her private assets in a way that centered or rewarded the new queen consort, it invites a profound interpretation. It is not necessarily an act of aggressive rejection, but it is an undeniable act of emotional prioritization. Because Balmoral was never about constitutional rank or public duty, it was about the purity of emotional trust. Camilla, by all official accounts, worked tirelessly to develop a respectful and steady relationship with Elizabeth in her final years. Their public interactions were consistently cordial. Yet, Warmth displayed for the cameras does not always translate into intimacy behind closed doors. There is a vast difference between being accepted into the family out of necessity and truly belonging to the inner sanctum. Belonging in Elizabeth's highly guarded world was earned through decades of unblemished loyalty, quiet, thankless service, and an absolute alignment with the stoic tone of the monarchy. Camilla's path into the royal family was a hurricane. It carried a legacy of public skepticism and institutional trauma that endured for decades. Even after the successful rehabilitation of her image through years of consistent hard work, the memory of the chaos she inadvertently brought to the crown never fully vanished from the cultural consciousness, nor from the memory of the woman who had to clean up the mess. Elizabeth, who endured enormous, unimaginable strain during the breakdown of Charles and Diana's marriage, would have carried the weight of that history internally. Not necessarily with active resentment, but with a sharp, unforgiving awareness. An awareness fundamentally shapes decisions about legacy. The inheritance granted to Lady Louise can be clearly read as an affirmation of a completely different branch of the family tree, a branch utterly untouched by past scandal, defined entirely by steady, reliable discretion. It signals exactly where the late queen believed the emotional continuity of her family truly resided. This act does not strip Camilla of her official role. It does not diminish her authority as the king's wife, but it decisively places the emotional center of Balmoral, the spiritual heart of the family, in other, quieter hands. Furthermore, there is a vital dimension of generational alignment that Prince William is currently engineering. Camilla's identity and authority within the monarchy are entirely intertwined with Charles's reign. Her influence flows directly from her partnership with the sovereign. While Charles is king, she is a central figure. But when the inevitable happens and Prince William ascends to the throne, Camilla's role will immediately transition to that of Queen Dowager. That shift fundamentally reduces formal power. It alters her proximity to the ultimate decision-making processes of the institution. If William's inner circle is already coalescing around figures like Edward, Sophie, and heavily protecting the interests of Lady Louise, Camilla's long-term influence within the family structure may depend far more on personal relationships than institutional authority, and those specific relationships have always been, at best, highly complex. William's fierce loyalty to his late mother's memory is well documented and deeply ingrained in his character. While he has maintained a strict, professional, public civility with Camilla, acting the part of the dutiful stepson, the emotional terrain behind the scenes is widely understood to be far more nuanced. Time has undoubtedly softened the sharpest edges of past tensions, but history does not simply evaporate. In that highly charged context, Elizabeth's private choice gains extraordinary tactical texture. By anchoring a portion of the Balmoral estate to Louise and bypassing the king's wife, the late queen reinforced a lineage of trust that entirely bypasses earlier controversies. She rooted the estate's emotional future in absolute stability, rather than in forced reconciliation. The monarchy ultimately survives on symbolism just as much as it survives on constitutional statute. When Queen Elizabeth communicated her wish regarding Camilla's title during her jubilee, she did so publicly, intentionally, and strategically to secure the transition of state power. But when she arranged the distribution of her private beloved estate, she did so silently, guided only by her heart. Public endorsement can secure institutional calm for a time, but a private bequest reveals the absolute truth of personal gravity. Camilla remains central to Charles's current reign, fulfilling her duties with admirable consistency and contributing significantly to the monarchy's public presence. Yet, this inheritance narrative subtly and permanently delineates emotional territory. It suggests that while the queen consort stands firmly beside the throne in London, she may not stand at the true beating heart of Balmoral's memory. That distinction is not explosive in the way a tabloid headline is. It is quiet, but in the nuanced, coded language of royal behavior, quiet distinctions carry the weight of mountains. What we are witnessing with the enforcement of this will is the deliberate pruning of the royal family tree. Every monarchy operates on two systems simultaneously. The first is visible: the titles, the line of succession, the constitutional laws, the public funding, and the ceremonial hierarchy. The second is invisible: the trust networks, the access, the physical proximity to the monarch, and the emotional legitimacy. Queen Elizabeth was a master of balancing those two systems for more than 70 years. She understood that the crown survives not only through the rigid application of law, but through tone, through the incredibly careful calibration of who feels included in the inner circle and who is gently but firmly distanced. Now, under the watchful eye of Prince William, that calibration is rapidly evolving into a new doctrine of survival. King Charles reigns, but his reign began under extraordinary scrutiny and profound personal vulnerability. In early 2024, the shocking announcement that the king had been diagnosed with cancer accelerated the internal dynamics of transition. While Charles continues to bravely carry out his duties, his schedule is managed with extreme care, and the reality of his mortality has brought the future sharply into focus. Prince William is no longer merely preparing for kingship in theory. He is operating in practice, acting as the de facto enforcer of the family's standards. Each engagement he undertakes, each decision he influences, and each inheritance he protects builds the framework of the monarchy he will eventually lead. And the framework he is meticulously building is remarkably leaner, colder, and more ruthlessly disciplined than anything seen in the last century. In previous generations, the royal family functioned as a sprawling entity. Numerous cousins, aunts, and extended relatives undertook patronages, lived in grace and favor apartments, and enjoyed the halo of royal status. Public roles were diffuse. But modern media scrutiny, demands for financial transparency from the taxpayer, and shifting public sentiment regarding inherited privilege have forced a brutal consolidation. The monarchy simply cannot afford fragmentation or the risk of peripheral scandals. In recent years, that fragmentation became a daily reality. The spectacular disgrace and withdrawal of Prince Andrew removed a senior working royal from the board. The voluntary exile and subsequent media warfare waged by Prince Harry and Meghan stripped away the younger, supposedly modernizing wing of the family. The result is a dramatically smaller institution, stripped of its buffer zones. In such a high-stakes, hyper-exposed environment, unwavering loyalty becomes the most valuable strategic capital the family possesses. Prince Edward and Sophie, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, have increasingly filled the massive operational gaps left by the departures, doing so with zero complaints and little fanfare. They represent the ideal: continuity without controversy. Their presence reassures the public rather than destabilizing the headlines. Their daughter, Lady Louise, is the pure product of that stable, drama-free branch. By aggressively supporting her place within the sacred grounds of Balmoral, William is reinforcing a clear pattern to the public and the press. The future monarchy will ruthlessly prioritize steadiness over spectacle. It will reward those who keep their heads down and do the work, and it will permanently exile those who use the crown for personal gain. There is profound symbolism in the geography of this decision. Balmoral has long functioned as the ultimate reset point for the royal family. It is the fortress where tensions cooled, where the most difficult, institution-altering conversations unfolded away from the prying microphones of the press, where children could run across open fields without the intrusion of long-lens cameras. Because it is also where Queen Elizabeth passed away, the location is now forever sealed as sacred ground in the modern royal narrative. Its emotional gravity has intensified tenfold. Whoever occupies space within its borders occupies a place in the symbolic continuity of the crown itself. When Elizabeth anchored a portion of that estate to Louise, she was not merely gifting stone walls and grazing land. She was deliberately embedding a younger, untainted generation inside the very memory of the institution. And when William ensured that embedding remained undisturbed, brushing aside the commercial ambitions of others, he irrevocably aligned himself with that memory. This alignment matters deeply because the monarchy, at its core, is ultimately an exercise in storytelling. The story William appears to be shaping for his future reign emphasizes iron discipline, emotional containment, controlled modernization, and a drastically reduced cast of characters, leading to much stronger internal cohesion. Contrast this emerging strategy with the chaotic earlier eras, where public disagreements spilled outward into the tabloids, television interviews fractured the royal mystique, memoirs detailed petty grievances for profit, and legal disputes exposed the vulnerabilities of the bloodline. The lesson William has learned from those years of turmoil seems incredibly clear. Expansion without alignment invites ruin. His emerging inner circle reflects a severe contraction toward absolute trust. Camilla's future position underscores this brutal transition further. Her authority is inherently tied to Charles's breath. When William becomes king, the center of gravity will shift violently. Respect will undoubtedly remain, but operational influence will vanish. The generational shift is not something that will happen eventually, it is already visible in the present moment. William and Catherine present a model of leadership grounded in measured visibility and flawless family stability. Edward and Sophie mirror that exact steadiness in their supporting roles. Louise, quietly studying at St. Andrews, the same ancient university where William met Catherine, visually and symbolically embodies this continuity across educational and social lines. She is the blueprint for the minor royals of the future, educated, private, and fiercely loyal. The exclusion of the noisy, the ambitious, and the compromised is not always achieved through dramatic banishments. It is often executed with devastating subtlety. Monarchies rarely announce their emotional reconfigurations with press releases. They demonstrate them through seating arrangements at state banquets, through the allocation of private property, through joint appearances on balconies, and, most powerfully, through absence. Absence can be louder than a shouted command. The inheritance narrative regarding Lady Louise does not accuse anyone. It does not invite confrontation. It simply reveals a permanent alignment. And in the high-stakes game of royal survival, alignment is absolutely everything. As the monarchy moves through this period of profound transition into its next, leaner chapter, financial considerations hover constantly in the background. The maintenance of castles and vast estates requires enormous capital. King Charles has signaled a deep interest in cost efficiency across all royal operations, looking to trim the fat from the institution. Yet, the cottage associated with Louise, and the resources required to maintain it, appears completely secure within the new framework. That security suggests extreme prioritization amid the pruning process. Pruning a tree is not an act of destruction. It is a painful act of refinement designed to save the trunk. The British monarchy is refining itself in real time under William's watchful eye. It is narrowing its focus exclusively to figures who generate stability rather than anxiety. It is centering the branches of the family tree that have never challenged institutional coherence. It is preparing for a reign under William that will undoubtedly be more controlled, more focused, and infinitely less forgiving of deviation from the path of duty. Lady Louise Windsor may or may not choose to step into a prominent, full-time working role in the future. At her young age, her path remains entirely flexible. She could maintain a quiet, private life adjacent to the crown, pursuing a career while occasionally appearing at family events. Or, as the ranks of working royals thin out due to age and exile, she could gradually assume official duties if called upon by her cousin. That very ambiguity, that lack of desperate ambition, is the core of her value to the institution. She is not overexposed. She is a blank canvas of loyalty. Flexibility combined with absolute discretion is the rarest commodity in the modern world. Queen Elizabeth's final, incredibly private decision proves that she recognized that rarity perfectly. The full text of the Queen's will may remain sealed in a London vault for nearly a century. The intricate legal pages and specific financial allocations will not be open for public scrutiny or tabloid dissection anytime soon. But the monarchy, as an institution that thinks in centuries, has always communicated its most vital truths through gesture far more effectively than through disclosure. An invitation to share a carriage ride through the Scottish mist, a quiet, unpublicized inheritance of a modest stone cottage, a legacy placed into careful, uncalloused hands. These gestures accumulate into a grand narrative, and the narrative emerging now, guided by the unseen hand of a deceased queen and enforced by a future king, is crystal clear. The future of the crown will not be shaped by those who command the loudest headlines or those who seek to monetize their heritage. It will be safeguarded by those who preserve the equilibrium. Queen Elizabeth spent a grueling lifetime safeguarding that equilibrium against internal and external threats. In her final private act, she identified exactly who could help sustain it. She did not choose the loudest voice. She did not choose the most powerful title in the room. She chose the steadiest presence. And as the monarchy braces for the challenges of a new century, that quiet steadiness may prove to be the most valuable inheritance of all. The quiet ones, it seems, will inherit the kingdom.